Rhode Island politics just shifted in more ways than one. Speaker of the House Joe Shekarchi announcing that he's not going to be running for governor, officially stepping aside and clearing the way for what now looks like a head-to-head Democratic primary between Governor Dan McKee and Helena Foulkes. No longer a crowded field, the race for governor is coming into focus early. And that's not the only major change this week. After years of controversy, Rhode Island Department of Transportation Director Peter Alviti will retire on February 27th, closing one of the most polarizing tenures in state government. Taken together, these developments point to something bigger, perhaps, a moment of transition across Rhode Island government, long-standing power centers beginning to shift. Well, that's the political backdrop for today's episode. And while the governor's race is grabbing headlines, another statewide contest may prove just as consequential. That's the race for Attorney General.
Bartholomew Town.
Bartholomew Town is brought to you in part by Navigant Credit Union, who have been a staple in the local business community for more than 108 years. Today, Navigant is a $3.4 billion institution serving more than 136,000 members across 25 physical branch locations. But since its founding in 1915, the mission has never changed. Navigant Credit Union's team of financial professionals have remained committed to improving the financial well-being of the families, businesses, and communities they serve across Rhode Island. Learn more at navigantcu.org. Welcome into Bartholomew Town. I'm Bill Bartholomew. Rhode Island politics getting a little bit more clear, and in some ways perhaps a little more unsettled this week as Speaker of the House Joe Shekarchi announcing that he will not run for governor. Look, folks, I've been telling you for, several months here on the podcast, on the radio, on television, that I do not think that Speaker of the House Joe Shekarchi is going to run for governor. There's a number of reasons why this was the case. The number one is that even though right now the shape and scope and full efforts of the Rhode Island Democrat Party are definitely not behind Governor Dan McKee, and I'll get into that in just a second, a little bit more detail. All right, Dan McKee is not the de facto head of the Democrat Party in Rhode Island. He still, as the incumbent governor, has secured the union support, other major, you want to call them organizational supports, and donor support. McKee announcing he's surpassed $1 million in fundraising. They're saying that actually exceeds their pace from 2022 when McKee won the Democrat primary and ultimately a re-election. There's just not a path for Joe Shekarchi unless he was able to truly pull away significant players like Local 271 or the AFT NEA. And it just wasn't there for Shekarchi. And without that, in a three-way race against Helena Foulkes, who now has significantly more money than Dan McKee and has been on the ground for significantly more time than she was in 2022, introducing herself to people, including at the grassroots level, the Speaker of the House, though the most powerful position in Rhode Island government, few people, if you went out and, stood at the Providence Place Mall or walked around in Narragansett, very few people, 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10 would be able to, by name, tell you who the Rhode Island Speaker of the House is. So just a series of problems for Shekarchi. If McKee got out of this thing, or if McKee found himself in a scenario where those major supports in any way, shape, or form moved away from him, that would have been a lane for Shekarchi. If Shekarchi's had somehow had expanded name recognition, maybe he had a radio show, or maybe somehow, some way he was a prominent individual before getting into politics, that might have helped the cause. But all things taken in tandem, it just wasn't going to happen for Shekarchi. And now the question is, you may recall a couple of weeks ago when the Speaker was on with me, I asked him, will you endorse Dan McKee if you don't run? And the Speaker said, well, I'm going to go through a process. Nobody's asked me. Right now, folks, let's be clear. That is the position of the Rhode Island Democrat Party. And how do we know this? You, on a psychological level, on a practical level, just take a look at the emails that go out from the party. You do not get the sense in any way that the Rhode Island Democrat Party is fully behind or at all behind Dan McKee. And so major figures like Joe Shekarchi, the Speaker of the House, Val Lawson, the Senate President, whoever, when asked that question, who are you going to endorse for governor, there should be no hesitation. But clearly, there is some kind of divide. Does this lead to a point where the party moves their endorsement to Helena Foulkes? Highly unlikely. She's right on the fringe of what a Democrat would be in a lot of different ways, particularly her connections in, look, she's a technocrat. And that is outside of the parameters of what the Rhode Island Democrat Party right now seems to be. But is it possible they don't make any endorsement at all? Yes. Is it possible that this vacuum allows for somebody else to get into the race? Somebody else of credibility? Yes, it does. At some point, Liz Beretta-Perrick, the head of the Rhode Island Democrat Party, and that entire organization and all of the power players around it need to make a decision, yes or no, are we in on McKee? And if they are, they need to start showing it. Because without that institutional support, it does feel like right now, this is becoming a bit of a rudderless ship. Now, McKee saw some big time, or at least they're touting it as big time polling number increases with the Morning Consult poll earlier this week. He saw a jump to 49% from 40% in terms of approval rating. He saw his disapproval rating decrease to 36%, whatever. Polls are, especially in the middle of the wintertime, they're definitely not the metric that we need to spend a huge amount of time on. What we need to look at right now is the psychology. How are these two major candidates, McKee and Foulkes, positioning themselves other than this absolute nonsense that we constantly hear where Helena Foulkes says, you know, Dan McKee's incompetent because of the Washington Bridge. And then Dan McKee says, well, Helena Foulkes pumped opioids into the community because of her role at CVS. And this, hey, he's incompetent. Hey, she's poisoned, killing people with opioids back and forth is going to get old. It already is beyond old, but it's going to get old more and more and more as we move into the season. Perhaps with the exit of Shekarchi from the conversation, now we'll actually start to see some policy ideas. And policy ideas at this stage are viable, even on a micro basis. Take a look at David Morales, critical of Brett Smiley. David Morales, the state representative, challenging Providence Mayor Brett Smiley in the Democrat primary. Critical of Smiley on snow removal. Doesn't just put it out there as a soundbite. A couple of days later, comes back with a website and an entire snow removal adjustment plan that's got video, it's got infographics. That's real campaigning at this phase. And the governor's race better step up into, I'm not saying they got to put out a snow removal plan, but we need to start seeing snappy, understandable, digestible presentations that can define who these individuals are. And then the Democrat Party somehow, some way needs to get its act together and decide yes or no, are we behind McKee? So that's one shift that's happened this week. Another major shift. Look, folks, I've been critical of Peter Alviti for a long time now. Probably no figure in state, local, whatever government has ever been on the receiving end of my negativity more than Peter Alviti. And that's because he did a terrible job with the communications around the Washington Bridge. I'm not sitting there telling you that Gina Raimondo, Dan McKee, Peter Alviti, Humpty Dumpty, anybody had anything specifically to do with the infrastructure meltdown that resulted in the closure of that bridge. Okay, we won't know that in a factual manner for a while. The idea that this thing is going to go to the 13 contractors that are being sued, the idea that this thing is going to happen in a courtroom anytime soon, when you look at the court calendar in Rhode Island, folks, the idea that you're going to get 13 contractors in front of a judge in a case of this magnitude anytime before the 2026 election is a joke. You probably won't see it until maybe even before the 2028 presidential election. So we don't really know. We don't have the forensic knowledge to sit here and say exactly what happened. I can't sit here and blame Peter Alviti for the bridge, but you can blame Peter Alviti for a terrible, and I mean textbook level terrible job with the rollout of information and the understanding of how to talk to the people in this state on this major issue. And for that, he has deeply damaged faith in government and certainly Dan McKee. Now, McKee, could he have fired Peter Alviti or forced him or suggested he go retire much earlier than this? Sure. It does feel like, how in the world, after the performance that Peter Alviti had in front of the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee unable to answer basic questions about the Washington Bridge. Right there, that seemed to be, that was the end of his tenure in my mind, if it hadn't already occurred. But look, now you get to a point, McKee had to neutralize Helena Foulkes' ability to say, if I'm elected governor, I'm going to fire Alviti. He had to take the soundbite away. What we really need is a holistic, at least analysis and understanding of the Department of Transportation. That's actually what we need. Doesn't matter who's running for governor or who wins the governorship. But Alviti's going to retire on February 27th. Now, there's a human piece to this as well. This is a human being that, at the end of the day, has a profession as a professional engineer that became a bureaucrat initially through the labor union, and then at the city of Cranston, where he was Department of Public Works head. Is this a guy that's a moron or an evil guy? Absolutely not. It's just outrageous that the continuation of the messaging around the bridge, well, we might be, able to get it open by the spring. This is in 2023. Well, maybe by March, and then the dates move, and then they put out RFPs that are unresponded to. Just unacceptable level of communication. And for that and that alone, Peter Alviti's legacy significantly damaged. And he goes out under a cloud where, look, McKee, in his commentary about this, did everything he could to distance himself from Alviti, whether it was in written form or in interview form on Channel 12 that I saw yesterday, or Channel 10. He's not saying, we got a cake coming in from Pastiche, and we're going to have a buffet with party hats and a thanks a lot, Pete party. He did an unbelievable job the whole time he was here. Yeah, the bridge was bad, but he's done a great job. We love Peter Alviti. See you later. It was as dismissive of a set of remarks as you possibly could find. I would recommend going to check that out. So these are changes, man. This changes the scope of things, maybe in a predictable way. Shekarchi not in the race. Alviti no longer available as a soundbite or a representative of what Helena Foulkes was trying to frame as incompetence or insider deals or something. And now this race for governor can really start. All the while, the race for attorney general, and others, by the way, other races, of course, are heating up. The race for attorney general really getting interesting. You've got 4 candidates. You've got Keith Hoffman, who has been on Bartholomew Town, was on last year. You can find that episode, end of last year. He from the Rona administration, if you will, when a senior deputy assistant attorney general. You've got Jason Knight, big time on the gun advocacy. He's the state representative from Barrington. You've got Joe Solomon Jr. from Warwick, and you've got Kim Ahern. These are 4 legitimate candidates in that race. This is a major race. We've seen the role that attorneys general play in pushing it back against policies of the Trump administration. We've seen the role that attorneys general in Rhode Island play in a quasi-oversight role, if not outright oversight role. And we've seen the collaborative efforts required between the attorney general's office and other aspects of state government. That requires a nuanced understanding of a lot of different things. Today's guest is Kim Ahern, and she comes from a background that includes more prosecutorial experience than all of the other candidates combined. Say that 3 times fast. More prosecutorial experience than all the other 3 candidates combined. She also worked for both the Raimondo and McKee administrations, and she was the head of the Cannabis Control Commission, which was at the time a brand new state agency as legalized cannabis came online. So we're going to talk about power. We're going to talk about who holds it, how it's used, and what accountability should look like in Rhode Island right now, with Kim Ahern coming up in just a matter of moments here on Bartholomew Town, where we are brought to you in part by the University of Rhode Island Online. Are you ready to take the next step in your career at URI Online? They offer business and leadership-focused programs designed to fit your life. Yeah, that's right, you and your life, whether your goal is to advance your career in fields like public administration, supply chain management, or training and development. Their online programs provide the flexibility you need with a high-quality education you deserve. Learn from experienced faculty and collaborate with a network of professionals, all from the comfort of your home or wherever life takes you. Visit uri.edu/online to explore programs and start building your future today. URI Online. Learn anywhere with us. Now, my conversation with Attorney General candidate Kim Ahern. It's Bartholomew Town. Kim Ahern, welcome to Bartholomew Town. It's your first time on the show, I think.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much for having me, Bill.
That's interesting because I feel like you're just one of those people that you're in the mix on a lot of things of interest to me. And whether it's on the Cannabis Control Commission side, but really your prosecutorial experience and the fact that your tenure has spanned multiple attorneys general. Talk about that just run as a prosecutor in Rhode Island through a number of different administrations and how that has sort of helped you to evolve as a legal mind.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Bill. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate that question. It's a nice segue into why I'm running for Attorney General. The Attorney General's most important job in Rhode Island is to keep Rhode Islanders safe. And my entire career that you just started to hit on has been dedicated to doing just that. So first, I went to law school here at Roger Williams Law, and then I clerked for Judge Maureen McKenna Goldberg, who's a judge on the highest court of Rhode Island, the Rhode Island Supreme Court. But then from there, I really started my true legal practice at the Attorney General's office. And I'm so grateful and honored to have served as a prosecutor under the past 3 attorneys general. And so I've personally prosecuted over 1,000 criminal cases, ranging from violent crimes to domestic violence, sexual assault, animal abuse, and bringing justice to hundreds of survivors of those types of crimes. From there, after serving for just shy of a decade, I went on to be legal counsel to the past 2 governors, and then the head of a brand new state agency that you just referenced. And every step of the way, I've worked tremendously hard in my career as a lawyer, as an advocate, as a policy expert, to keep our communities safe, our systems fair, and our values strong. And I really think that's critically important for the next attorney general. So it's not just keeping our communities safe from violent crime, but it also means keeping our communities safe when this administration in Washington, D.C. comes here and attacks our fundamental values, freedoms, our way of life, our residents, our nonprofits. You need a fighter in that job. And if you know anything about my career, you know that I don't back down from a fight.
Well, in terms of your career span, which you just described it there, and of course, 2 stops, well, back-to-back stops in the governor's office, how has understanding different aspects of whether it's on the ground from a prosecutorial experience inside the Attorney General's office, whether it's inside the State House with the executive branch, whether it's on the Cannabis Control Commission, how has the functionality of government informed your ability to do exactly, well, to fight back against what you just described right there, which are federal policies and sometimes seemingly capricious, you never know what's going to come next, ready, fire, aim type of actions coming from Washington? How has the nuance of your career specifically informed your ability to understand what might be coming and what the best tools are to fight that which is coming from Washington?
I think that's a great question. You know, you wouldn't want someone to lead a business who's never owned a business or worked in a business before. And so for me, I think you want the next attorney general to have a whole host of different experiences so that you're ready for the depth and breadth of everything that that office has. And it has a remarkable amount of responsibility, in particular under this administration that you were just referencing. And so I think that because I go from being really a courtroom advocate, a lawyer, a trial lawyer in every courtroom across the state for just shy of a decade to working in the State House in law and policy. And so to answer your question, I think I can give a real example. So working for Governor Raimondo, the first thing I did as a legal counsel with Governor Raimondo was to convene a working group. And that working group was to look at the criminal justice system and to look critically at it because we know that the criminal justice system is not perfect. We know it has many faults. And I saw that firsthand as a prosecutor for a decade. And so we convened a working group full of judges and nonprofits and public defenders and advocates across the span of the criminal justice system. And we looked critically at ways that we can improve our criminal justice system, both for juveniles leaving the system and hopefully never returning, and in particular, people leaving the ACI, and trying to find ways to have meaningful employment opportunities for them, because we know that that's one of the best ways to keep our recidivism rate down. And I think that's a good example, I think, of what you were asking, how you can take a real example of being a prosecutor for just shy of a decade and then take it to, doing policy work in the State House and trying to implement change in the laws. And so I think it really shows how my breadth of experience, I think, will serve Rhode Island well if I'm so honored to be elected the next Attorney General.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I think right now we're in a moment where for a lot of people, certainly a lot of Rhode Islanders, there's just stress and confusion around one, issues of affordability, which we can get into that on a general or specific basis, because we could spend 45 minutes talking about, I don't know, electricity rates or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the general purview of the Attorney General, but it does fall under your purview in certain senses. There's no doubt about that. I think just more than anything right now, understanding the nuances of the tools available to fight against that which is coming out of Washington has never been more important, because we're in a moment where you see a lot of ideas, you see a lot of panic, you see a lot of shouting, but what about specific action? So that is a great example. Attorney General Noronha has been a creature of this. In fact, I would say one of the leading attorneys general across the country in challenging Trump policies, no doubt about it. Do you intend to continue that sort of aggressive stance against the Trump administration anytime something comes in that looks like it may have a negative impact on Rhode Islanders?
Absolutely. I commend Attorney General Noronha for his advocacy. He's one of the 3 AGs that I worked for. And I said this to him recently, actually, in conversation, that he is showing in real time exactly the kind of Attorney General I want to be. And by that, I mean that I would not hesitate to get on a plane and fly to whatever state that we need to go to advocate for residents of this state, for patients in our hospital systems, to stand up quite literally and fight for our values. And of course, that's what he's doing with respect to Fatima Hospital and Roger Williams right now. But to answer your question more broadly, yes, the Attorney General's office has such a range of work, right? I think, to take a step back for a second, Rhode Island's really unique. We do not have DAs. We don't have county prosecutors like basically every other state in the country has, most other states. And so the Attorney General is basically 2 really important roles. 1, it's the top prosecutor in the state of Rhode Island. 2, it's the people's lawyer. And I would take both of those roles just critically important, take those roles. And I think the people's lawyer side of it is what you were asking about. The Attorney General has a great deal of responsibility to stand up and intervene at the PUC, to fight for lower utility rates. The Attorney General can intervene at the Office of the Health Insurance Commissioner to say that we need affordable and accessible health care. The Attorney General can be an environmental advocate and say we need access to our coastlines. I want my kids to be able to go to the beaches in Rhode Island. It's part of the reason we live here, right? And I love living here. And so the Attorney General just has a breadth of experience and ability to advocate for working families and to help make Rhode Island a more safe and affordable place to live.
It's a constitutionally elected office. It is an independent office. It's not the Inspector General's office that some people fantasize about, somebody coming in and going around and knocking desks over and trying to find all the corruption in Rhode Island or whatever it is. You hear this kind of talk, especially on talk radio and places like that, but other spaces as well. But there's no doubt an oversight role that the Attorney General's office can provide by virtue of being a constitutionally elected independent office. And yet at the same time, there's going to be a lot of letters and headings that have both the governor's insignia and name on it and the Attorney General. So how do you balance that role of being both an independent officer and somebody who is in tandem with much of the state in terms of sometimes there's multiple. There can be a multitude of issues that require collaboration between the governor's office, the General Assembly, and the Attorney General. So you have to walk that line in terms of oversight. How do you do it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And one, it highlights my experience. I have actually negotiated bills and budgets at the State House with the highest levels of the government, from the Speaker to the Senate President to the governor's office. And I share that. I've also been the head of a state agency, a brand new state agency, right? And so I've actually been in a governor's cabinet. I've formed budgets. I've gone through the budget legislative hearing process at the State House. And I say that only because I think I walk into this job having a unique role and perspective to play. And I agree with you. The Attorney General is an independent constitutional officer. And so the Attorney General needs to be independent in that sense, certainly. In particular, if we're investigating crimes, I think, like, for example, 38 Studios is a good example of that, right? We look at crises that have actually struck the last several attorneys general, right? Whether there's a bad economic development deal at the State House and a grand jury should be convened, right? That's a example of the Attorney General being independent of the other general office holders at the State House. And so certainly I think my experience, like being the head of a state agency, working in the State House for 4 years under 2 governors, and actually being a prosecutor in courtrooms across this state for just shy of a decade, I think will lend itself well, I think, for the independence that you're talking about and also the advocacy that is needed.
How do you separate yourself other than by what you're going to lay out over the next, I don't know, what is it, February, 8 months or whatever it is? You'll have plenty of time to figure this out, but just on in sort of in an elevator pitch style, you've got three opponents inside the Democrat primary. They're all viable candidates. We'll say that. It's not a situation where you have a governor's race and you got somebody who is going to get 0.03%. This is going to be a very competitive race. This race is extraordinarily important for the future of Rhode Island. No doubt about it. How do you separate yourself from your three opponents?
Yeah, well, I think you're spot on that Rhode Island is extraordinarily lucky to have a number of well-qualified individuals running in this race for Attorney General, hands down. And so for me, it comes down to who's ready to step in and lead on day one. And in particular, what I was just talking about, this is not a job where you want on-the-job training. This is a job where crisis can strike at any moment, and you want someone who's been tested and ready and can lead through that. And so for me, I'm the only candidate in this race who's been a prosecutor under the past three attorney generals. I'm the only candidate in this race who's been a legal counsel to the last two governors. And I'm the only candidate in this race who's actually already been the head of a state agency. And at its core, the attorney general is a very large state agency. And I want to say this to your question. The attorney general is Rhode Island's top prosecutor. And I have more experience than all of the others combined in criminal prosecution of felony cases in the state of Rhode Island. And so for me, you want someone who's ready and able to lead on day one, and I think I'm that candidate. I know I'm that candidate.
Kim Ahern, running for Attorney General of Rhode Island in the Democrat primary. You will face Representative Jason Knight, Keith Hoffman, and Joe Solomon Jr. in that, unless somebody else gets it. You never know. Maybe Joe Shekarchi is going to run for Attorney General. It's anything's possible.
The water's nice.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Bartholomew Town. We're here for you every Tuesday and Thursday, and we're brought to you in part by Newport Film. Visit newportfilm.com for all the latest screening details, including tonight. I'll be hosting a director conversation with Rob Moss at the Jamestown Arts Center. That's a 7 o'clock showtime. If you're listening to this on release day, Thursday, February 5th, newportfilm.com for all details. I'm Bill Bartholomew, and we'll talk soon. Bartholomew Town is brought to you by Navigant Credit Union, Half Street Group, the University of Rhode Island Online, and Newport Film.